Bliss and Grit is an entirely listener-supported show. Supporting us is also designed to support you through keeping the episodes rolling, but also through rewards for your donation, like a getting started guide, a private forum, and downloadable meditations. To become a supporting member, you can visit patreon.com/bliss and grit. Hello, beautifuls. You're listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're having conversations about the awakening spiritual path and what does that even mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, the beauty and the crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? Thank you for being here as a listener. We hugely appreciate it. If you want to stay up to date on all things Bliss and Grit and get a weekly digest of the resources that we are currently loving, you can go to blissandgrit.com to subscribe. And if you're wanting more in-depth support as you navigate your own path and internal process, we both see clients privately. So feel free to go to the website for more information on that as well. The last thing before we head into the conversation, we do sometimes curse. So if you are in non-swearing company, you may want to wear headphones. Okay, here we go. Hello, Vanessa.
Hello, Brooke.
So lovely to see you today.
Lovely seeing you too.
So there are a couple different things, and as usual, we'll see how they all intersect. But one of the things that I have been watching in myself a lot, something that kind of clarified a couple of months ago, and then of course I get to keep seeing it unfold deeper, is, okay, I'm going to call it something that sounds like, no, but you don't understand. I'm the good one, which I've seen in a variety of guises. So that's not a surprising voice, but this particular one, if we can zoom in on it, I think it'll have some fun nuggets, and we'll see what kind of things it aligns with for you. But I have a couple of two core values about my work life, which are 100% true. So my two core values are, it has to be in integrity and it has to be useful. So it doesn't matter what I do in my work life, has to be in integrity, has to be useful. Those things are absolutely true. And what clarified for me a couple of months ago is a way that I'm the one with integrity, that the ego very subtly co-opted that as an identity, the one with integrity, which implies the other ones who don't have integrity,
by nature.
Right? By nature, there's got to be in-group, out-group if I'm the one with integrity, and my work is in integrity. But what I realized that was limiting about it was that it was deeply stitched and woven into hiding. And that hiding, right, being quiet, not coming forward as a teacher, by which I mean literally like classroom teacher, as opposed to talking about being a spiritual teacher. Classroom teacher, like I have things that I have done deep inquiry and study of that I teach. And doing things to be visible in the world. Like this has been a long repeating theme. And we've touched on ways that this plays with fawn trauma response identity. Like there's lots in here, but this particular layer was really interesting to see. Like, oh my gosh, like I'm the good one. I'm the one with integrity is also just an identity at root. So it's interesting because I can see the identity and I can see how it plays in a way that keeps me small and limited. And the Halloween costume is basically the quiet one, or the one that like just does little bits and then disappears.
Into the integrity vortex where I'm going to integrate.
Into the integrity vortex, and for those listening, like a way that this, if I'm going to give a historical example, when Liberated Body came to an end, my previous podcast, that was for a myriad of reasons. It was genuinely that I was moving on to a different layer of inquiry that Liberated Body itself had led me into. There were lots of genuine pieces. But one of the things hanging me up was like, and now I don't talk about this anymore because I'm going beyond the body, right? I'm the one, no, like what's the truest truth? Because I'm the one that's integrity. And it keeps me small. So integrity has nothing to do with small. Integrity can be, and we have seen, is quite visible, hopefully, and open and out there, so that they got adhered together. Really interesting. And I'm just curious, I think there's plenty we can investigate here. Like, how do things piggyback on one another in terms of ego identity in ways that keep us limited? Because that's what's interesting, right? Like, why let go of identities? Because it's what good spiritual people do? No, because they keep us limited. So where does it keep us limited? And then we could also talk about hiding in general, although we touched on that a bit with Fawn. But I don't know, is there anything in your experience that
I literally
plays?
Can go in both directions. But before I go in either, do you mind if I ask you a question about that, about what you just shared?
But of course. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how did identifying as the one with integrity play out in hiding, even in the example that you gave, let's say with Liberated Body? If we take it closer, were you feeling compelled to talk about the body anymore? Were you shutting down opportunities that were occurring to you because you're the one with integrity? I mean, as a listener, you could just say, oh, but you didn't want to talk about the body anymore. How beautiful.
Yeah, right. And the inquiry itself of like what I like to learn did lead me elsewhere via learning deeply about the body. But that wasn't the integrity piece. It was more the way, and I do it with Bliss and Grit as well, of creating. Okay, here's what comes to mind the most when I think about Liberated Body. I remember I either wrote it on the website or I would actually say it in the introduction. I can't remember. But I would say, I talk to people who are way, way smarter than me. And I'm so lucky. So it had this like little old me kind of aspect. But the integrity piece was about ideas I had about how, out of integrity, it was to sort of teach or step forward or have a voice. And so the way I was allowed to, the way I could give myself permission was by being the one who was the dumbest one in the room. And so I have integrity because I'm acknowledging in Liberated Body, right? I was talking with surgeons and researchers and movement professionals who had been in the field for decades. And this way of making myself small paired with integrity. An alternate vision for how that might have gone would have been that I could have run courses based on things that I had learned, right? I had learned so much from talking with all these amazing people. I could have easily and thought about plenty of times, like run, an online class. Let's all get together and have a study group. But I couldn't step into the leadership role because it grated with my identity of staying small.
Right. Okay. So there was a pattern we could call staying small, right? Something that was running through the circuitry that says safest and most advisable thing to do is stay small. And then the one that felt it's the safest thing to do to play small, it sounds like could almost use your devotion to integrity as a justification to keep enacting the pattern of staying small. Am I hearing you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that I could look at, if we're going to stick with the liberated body example, I could look at the people who I was talking to, many of whom were teachers and ran class work. I never thought of them as out of integrity at all. The whole reason why I had them on was because I found them to be totally in integrity. But they were the ones, who had like license to do so. Which I guess is just about the small one. But it plays with the but I'm the good one. It's so interesting. Why does it play with but I'm the good one? I think it got caught up in ideas around internet marketing, internet teaching, right? And there is plenty of smarmy push, push, push kind of stuff out there. But the way that I made that so black and white, so concretized, just kept me in this small hiding out
pattern.
Can
I share what I could imagine, and you can correct me if I'm not understanding you? So I imagine if that pattern is running in the background, as we know, the unconscious pattern is or subconscious is that it's not safe to be bigger than this. And then this is my imagination. If I could draw this on a paper. So then that pattern that says it's not safe to be really seen and to claim myself and to own my seniority has to pull in a secondary pattern of I'm not worthy, or it can't really work so well, right? So it fortifies itself with, and you're not worthy. And then it says, but you're in integrity. You may not be in worth, but you're in integrity. So at least you're not pretending to be worth something. And P.S., all those marketing things that people are doing to get big, if that's really how it works after all, but those things, you're an integrity person. So those you don't have to do. And so it almost is like the pattern that really felt unsafe to come out of hiding in your fullness and your bigness, co-opted justification with its integrity system, which is a very true value for you, not just an identity.
Right. So that's why it's like very hard to see what it got attached to. Yeah,
it's like a true north for you. And it's like, but this is how you get to your true north. So it kind of just co-opted this very true value. And it has to pull in that close cousin of like, they have worth, I don't, in order to keep that probably spontaneous motion towards embodying your wholeness from coming into fruition.
Yeah. And when I feel into the alternative, like as this has been getting clarified over the last few months, the opposite movement are things like really standing in my own voice and what my own work is. Like it's really simple, but I can feel how that felt really, really threatening before and still feels new, feels very, very fresh and new. Yeah. So
okay, I think I know what I'll follow up with. That's a great story. It's got me excited to look at my own. Before I move into mine, I just want to say, isn't it so interesting what you pointed out with so much clarity? Something I've seen in a different way, where if we're, in this case, the good one, then there's others that are the out of integrity ones. I'm in integrity, others are out of integrity, right? We're not thinking about that second part. That's not how empaths usually roll, but there is an implication if you really look at it. Well, I saw the same thing, like in what I'm going to describe. If you're afraid of being judged, then you're making all these people into judges.
Right.
Right? If you're afraid of being persecuted, you're projecting persecutor onto all of these bystanders. So I just wanted to say that. We can come back to that because that's an interesting point. But all right, so I'm going to talk about hiding a little bit because it's fresh. It's fresh for me. And leading up to the interview we're going to have with Jane Clapp, where we talk about fond, fierce, and even truth, like we spoke about last week. When we look at truth, the truth of who we are in our magnificence, we've looked at this before in the past on some degree, but why is that so freaking scary? Like, why in the world would a human being feel that contracting against their own light is the advisable path. So let's talk about that.
Let's do it.
Coming out of hiding. So I've known for a long time, and I think I've even shared it here, that I've had a fear around being seen, for lack of better words, for being as spiritual as I am. We could say that sounds almost inflated because I don't mean I'm uber spiritual. So I'm going to rephrase it as mystical as I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I've known that even when we started Bliss and Grit and you and I used to record and we'd have these vulnerability hangovers, it was like, oh no, I admitted I believe in something. And it's been a huge healing. We really don't get that until we do something completely new anymore. But I've seen for a long time that based on my life history and based on how my patterns have run, I'm scared that if I share with people what I really believe and see and feel and practice, that I will be judged and I will be laughed at and I will be thought of as crazy, right? So I'd seen it, but like all belief systems, it seems as if we go in layers, right? Like we work with the gross outer shell and the obvious layer, like I can believe whatever I want to believe, and we keep going into the more subtle phenomena. And this last week, I saw for myself as I was working with something I was bumping up against, that, see how I best want to put it. There's something being called for within me to choose a team, so to speak. Am I going to believe that this is a world of form and then that spirit is somewhere out there, maybe in a next life, maybe in an ether? Or am I going to own what I truly believe, which is that this is a formless reality taking shape and form, and that all form is spirit and all form is God? Now I talk from that level. You would think I'm living from that level. And yet, when I could see that I had some fear in my system arise around coming out of hiding to claim how mystically oriented I am, I realized, oh, I'm still straddling the line here, right? I got 1 foot in, 1 foot out, because for me, let's just say my mystical orientation is no different than maybe someone's sexual orientation or someone's love orientation or someone's personality structure. It was inherent to me, right? It's who I am. It's not something I construct. It's something that is naturally, organically arising. So when we feel afraid to admit it, there's an inner division that starts to happen. Am I good? Am I bad? And then that can easily collapse into, there are those out there judging me. There are those who would laugh. And it's weird, right? Because you and I on a rational level, and all of you know, who cares if someone laughs at you, right? Like we're big enough to see that. Who cares if someone judges you? But in the moment when I get close to the pattern, because the pattern cares. Right?
Yeah, that's well said.
Not Vanessa in her
the pattern really cares.
In her full knowing, the pattern cares. When I get close to the pattern, it's almost as if it has abdicated all its power to this imaginary judge and jury that will call her crazy or kick her out of society. Who knows? Maybe it's an artifact of a past life, or the witches being burned at stakes, whatever it is, but it's casting this. There are people out there that are going to be judge and jury, that are getting ready to laugh at me and mock me. And in the pattern, that feels like life or death, and the pattern feels powerless. It has given its power to that outside force, as if someone said, wow, Vanessa, that's so crazy. you think angels exist or guides exist, if someone said that, as if that really means I am, right? As if then I can't own what I know to be true as valuable. And given our society, which is pretty weighted in 3D object consciousness, well, you have a problem on your hands if you can't go against the grain and feel safe, right? So I get what you're saying from my own personal experience. I mean, there's many layers to the story I'm telling, but on that simple layer, it's the more granular experience of transforming the pattern that says, do not come out of hiding and be your fullest self. That is very inadvisable and costly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking about like, okay, well, how? Which the reason why I'm hesitating is because that's what the entire show is about. That's why we work one-on-one with people. So I'm not trying to get to the giant level, right, of how do we get totally free of these patterns. But it is interesting. How do we have the experience? How do we reality test that it's safe to stand in what is true about us, including when people say, no, thank you, or I don't like it, or in your example, laugh at us. So for me, I mean, it starts with the seeing, right? I'm trying to remember, like, what was the moment when I think I had started working on a new project. I was tinkering around with the project, and I just kept like shaving it down based on like, what was the integrity thing, until it was just like if you were peeling hollow bamboo and you get to the empty center and it's like,
I took away all the meat.
Yeah, I'm not doing anything now. And why? Like, because I needed to strip away, like, what is this thing? I need to strip away everything. And I was stripping away things that I would, looking back now, because I'm talking about a somatic meditation program, I would 100% consider in integrity, like super useful, very thoughtful, but it was this strip away. And it was a way of avoiding, stepping forward, not the first time. It had to have happened so many times that it was like, this feels familiar. And so what is this? Like, why the stripping away, and not stepping forward and just saying like, hi, I'm Brooke. I've run 2 successful podcasts. I've been in private practice for 20 years. I'm a devoted learner and I love teaching. Let's hang out.
That's going to be your new promo.
Why is that so challenging? That's going to be totally my new promo. Yeah, I'll edit it out of this. And I saw that this idea of integrity was holding me in place where it felt safe to be small. Now, once I saw that, for me, one of the things that I have gotten good at and get better and better at is understanding that I am in direct relationship with life. I am life. And so I can think about it as a relationship and I can ask, right? I can talk to life and say, interesting. So I don't know how to do, besides forcing myself in a really uncomfortable way to do an extreme opposite. Like, for example, post to Instagram every day, like, I'm Brooke and I have all the answers, right? Or like, here's the Brooke Thomas blueprint that would be an extreme pendulum shift to the opposite extreme, because it's not integrity. It's just pretending and puffing myself up and all that stuff that I don't want to be in reality. So I don't know. It was such a blind spot. It was like, hey, life, I don't know how to feel into something that feels different than this, where I show up and I show up in integrity, but I don't use it as an excuse to whittle everything away to the nothingness, or to not stand in my truth and worthiness and voice and actually do something. And then several resources appeared that caught my eye really clearly. One of them was you and I talking about fawn and the fawn trauma response, which I'll link to in the show notes for those listening who may have missed it and are wondering what I'm talking about. And then Jane Clapp, who we're going to talk to soon, came out with a webinar, and I had done one of her webinars before. I really like them. Fawn to fierce, like exactly what I'm needing. And then tons of clarification pours through about that. Worked with another teacher, Sarah McCrum. She taught a class, Love Money, Money Loves You, because it gets all tied up in my scarcity stuff. And that money's the bad guy and I'm the bad guy if I earn and whatever.
Yeah, the integrity move is that you don't worry about money, right?
Right. I must have been a monk in a lot of past lives because I have that sort of conventional money bad association.
Money bad, me good.
Money bad, me good. I'm the good one. And that felt very genuine and true and just brought through a lot of fresh air about, it was a very integrity and in flow way of playing with these things. So the relationality with life has been really helpful of saying like, I don't know how, I don't know what this is. I just stumbled upon this massive blind spot that I've been inhabiting for, God knows how long. So what? And then life brought me tools that I got to like try on and feel into how it feels different. And that keeps expanding, of course, because that's been, I don't know, it's a few months old.
Obviously, the seeing is the first and most important part. And there is like a chunk of conditioning that can sometimes release when you see the pattern clear enough. I don't know if a whole pattern goes away just by seeing, but it's like the density of it or the stickiness of it can go away. So when I saw this the other day, and when I was working with my mentor and we were starting to sketch out what was happening, she kept almost like, imagine you have a crystal in your hand and you keep turning it in different directions. So you're seeing like the different facets of it. Well, that's what it feels like for me when I'm looking at something deeply. It's like, well, if you look at one facet, you say, oh, I'm scared of being judged and laughed at. Well, I grew up in a very conservative, non-multidimensional family. And my family bonds through humor and they do laugh at you. I mean, my cousins to this day laugh at me when they see my Instagram. So, look at one facet and I'm not making this up. This is based on lived personal experience of not perceiving myself as fitting into my family. Okay, so then turn the facet again. And you think, okay, well, people have felt afraid to come out of the closet and step into who they really are, especially when they're aligning with their depths and their tenderness and their heart and their beingness and their true selves for millennia for good reason, quote unquote, right? Because their safety was threatened. And unless you know you're more than form in a very deep way, that can be really scary. So it's like, okay, then, that's a piece of it. And then we kept turning it and it was like, wow, okay, I am presupposing that these people, it was really my family I was talking about, though I could extrapolate larger, but they were really the kernel, like, oh my God, if I was to admit who I really was in its entirety and my family saw, right? And then we look and we're like, I'm presupposing that people who in fact do love me, do treat me well, do accept me, will not accept me. I've already presupposed it. And in the action of presupposing it, I have not accepted myself. And that's that layer of self-betrayal. I mean, it's a hard word, but that word works for me. Sometimes I like a little sharpness in my truth. You all may not. But when I saw that, I'm like, wow, I'm not accepting me. I'm presupposing an imaginary world where if I was actually true to myself, which has not been tested because I have not always been aligned as fully with my true self publicly as I could be, I'm presupposing they will judge me and laugh at me. And so in defense of that, I'm not accepting myself and I'm not letting the fullness of myself shine through. Okay, so I saw that facet and I'm like, whoa, that's kind of big, right? Talk about beginner's mind. I'm bringing the past into the present, projecting it into the future, and in anticipation, cutting myself off at the legs. Okay. And then turn the crystal one more time. And I saw, wow. And this was the words my mentor used with me. This may not work for you all, but as I said, I like just a little bit of edge with my truth. It works for me. It shakes me a little bit. That I was turning people into enemies. That I was already, we could call them judge and jury. We can call them perpetrators. We can call them enemies, whatever it is. But I was projecting onto people who I love this role already. And that gets me like, oh yeah, that wakes me up. Like, wow, that's right. And it's not that nothing's ever happened in my life that could fall into this category, but it all doesn't fall into this category. And yet in the moment when that pattern is dominating my conscious mind, it is very dualistic, right? It's very binary. Like they're judging. I'm going to be judged. I have to therefore cut myself off at the limbs to protect myself from this whole cycle happening. So just the awareness alone already began to soften something. Is that what you noticed for yourself? Like just seeing the whole pattern soften
hugely.
Something?
Yes.
Yeah. It's almost like, in transformation, commonly, it's not that when things make sense, something changes like, oh, that makes sense. Now I'm going to give up on this pattern. But there is truth that when you provide a new perspective that makes greater sense, that feels more true, that it can kind of chip away at the density of the prior belief system. So, what's more true when I look at, like, I'm an advocate when Byron Katie says, the world is a benevolent place. Don't trust me. See it for yourself. I've always wanted to see that. And I think of myself as someone who fairly does see that, and then I'm like, oh yeah, except for right here when I think I have enemies in my family who love me already, right? Which is different than saying, oh, they may laugh. Okay. So what? That doesn't mean they don't adore me,
it might not be their
me,
thing.
think well of me, Maybe they're even secretly curious or in admiration. You don't know, right? So seeing it like, wow, look how I'm not living in that benevolent universe. That's fascinating. And then I watched my mind the next 2 days at how many times I was presupposing someone was upset with me or would think what I was saying wasn't valuable, or I don't know even how to put it into words. And it's funny because we are in public talking about all this stuff. That's why I'm saying this is subtle phenomena, because I'm not here worrying. Are you? I'm not meta-processing this. There's no analyzer in my head. But this is how subtle transformation gets when your goal is transformation, not management, right? Like we are looking at
which is a huge difference.
Like the complete dismantling of a pattern and the resurrection of a new way of engaging and perceiving reality, right? So we're getting super nitty gritty, given that we're people who are fairly unhidden about the patterns that are still saying, but not that far outside of the closet.
Right, I know, but whoa. Yeah, and you bring up a really interesting point that I just want to underscore a little bit, which is that an identity, meaning something that's not just naturally arising and true, spontaneous self, an identity requires an imaginary audience. And that imaginary audience is unfriendly in some way, shape, or form, because the driving question is, do they like it? And how is this going to go? And I remember hearing Adyashanti once talking about Jesus being the epitome of living the teaching of what does it look like? What does a life look like when do they like it goes away completely? And it's just your true nature. It's just what is directly alive in that moment. And you just show up in all of the truth of what you are. So it's really interesting to see all the little places where do they like it? How is this going to go? Still plays out. And like, no harm, no foul, right? We're coming out of a myriad of identity. That's what we're doing here. That's what happens in this culture. So no problem. But really interesting. So it plays along with a kind of turning others into audience, turning others into an unfriendly audience, sometimes to the point of presupposing enemies or presupposing
Right. You may
danger.
just presuppose they're better than you. You may presuppose all sorts of things, but it's this othering process, right? Whether they're enemies or they're just better than you, different than you. It's always an othering process. There's an other out there, and I must be aware of them.
Yes. And I must manage myself to make it okay to them, whatever that means, liked by them or safe or invisible. Since we started out talking about hiding. To the imaginary audience. So that can be something interesting to think about too. Like you were saying, watching your mind for a couple of days, like, where am I presupposing the audience? And it's so, innocently, but it's still so self-absorbed too, right? Because instead of just like, I exist and I am what I am, it's like, it's all about me. What is everyone out there thinking about me?
Well, it was kind of revelatory and relieving when you see that the limbic brain considers threat, like psychological threat or the threat of loss of connection, to be as dangerous as a physical threat. I mean, that just puts it into...
Yes, as actual physical annihilation.
It puts it into such perspective that these things, especially for empathic and spiritually sensitive people, where we're so self-reflective and we're so aware. I mean, that's why you and I can speak at this level, is we have so much awareness of every little thought, every little thing that's popping in, and like every little contraction of a muscle when someone says something. So all of these things with empathic people, we're so aware of how people feel. So we're sensing these micro motions, like I said this, and then someone winced. And now I'm believing they didn't like that. And now I'm believing I better not do that because it seems to have bothered them and I don't want to bother them. And next thing you know, we're all caught up in this identity tangle like a ball of yarn, but such is the human condition. It seems, at least the human condition so far. Can't wait to see what unfolds
so
for us.
far. Yes, I think we're on an evolving edge. Yeah, I'm in a new community right now because my son started a school that's we call ourselves a co-learning community. So what that means is 4 days a week, I'm on a campus with a ton of new people. Aged kindergartner to grandparents, and with the bulk being middle and high schoolers. But there's a lot of parents that I'm interacting with and things like that. So it's really like a fun petri dish for me of noticing all the thoughts of, what am I assuming about these people who I don't know? And how often do I make it about me? And what I assume they think of me. Do they, that person didn't quite meet my gaze in the hallway, but yesterday we had a conversation. Does that mean they don't? It's just like this interesting tour of the middle schooler that still lives inside me. And, in a genuinely interesting way, nothing's going on that feels actually, concerning at all. It's been a lovely community, but because it's being dumped into a totally new environment with a whole giant group of new people who I'm interacting with, it's just really fun. And so I've been putting myself into some on purpose uncomfortable situations. I have a phobia, for those who don't know, phobia of dance class, because growing up, I had physical challenges and tried out ballet, which didn't go great. Had a very shamey ballet matriarch for my teacher. There was a lot of ugly cries that happened as a result of that class. I took a dance class today with some of the other parents. I was like, this is going to be really interesting. I guess what I'm getting at is that there was a time and a place, and continues to be, with noticing these identities where it made sense to be really tender with myself, because it can be hard to see the ways that we've kept ourselves small, or how often we make it about ourselves, or how, the stories and narratives we're telling ourselves from the point of view of identity. There's a time and a place for that to be really tender. And that's important. That's important to be consistent throughout our lives. And then there's a point, and this is what I'm playing with right now, where that becomes sturdy enough that it's really fun to play with some anti-fragile strategies. And so one of my anti-fragile strategies is I'm going to go to this dance class. They put on the music, and I was like, no, this is terrible. This is going to be terrible. Or to strike up conversation with parents who've been here since the beginning who I don't know. Or, in my work life, to just be like, I'm just going to put out, I haven't done this yet, but I'm just going to put out a bunch of webinars and be like, these are things I've learned with all the stuff I've been doing. Let's hang out. I'm going to talk about it. I have stuff to teach. I'm really enjoying introducing some anti-fragile into this play, so that it doesn't just become about noticing every nuance and that I have to keep untangling things, because it can get a little like bruised peach syndrome.
Well, I like the way you described when there was enough sturdiness in the system. I'm thinking about, I do this somatic approach that you turned me on to, Brooke, muscle activation technique. And when I first started working with him, like my system couldn't hold integrity. My muscles like weren't firing neurobiologically. So, if he would press on my shoulder, my arm would go limp, and my system just wasn't holding integrity. And at that point, it wasn't the time to do CrossFit. It's not the time to go become a triathlon, right? It was the time to take it slow and be really mindful about how I was moving and using my body. And then over time, when the system starts to get integrity, in this case, I'm talking about the physical system, but we can see the implications.
It's a great metaphor.
When it starts to get sturdy and it can rebound and it has some resilience and it knows how to fire well, then you have to start moving differently, right? That's how you train it. That's how you get it into shape and you get to your goals for health, whatever they were. So I like what you're describing, and I feel the same. I mean, what helped me so far, this is something I just saw again on Friday with Clarity, so it's still fairly new. Today's Tuesday. But what I noticed was, okay, now this is my shorthand. Everybody, if this doesn't work for you, just insert your own words. But what I noticed, okay, so after I saw that, I was observing my mind and I could notice the thoughts coming in, like I did a wedding for somebody and like maybe they didn't like it. I don't know, but I'm presupposing like, oh my God, maybe they didn't like it. So let's say a thought comes in like that. I've just been saying to myself like a little interruptive mantra, not an enemy, not an enemy. And that line somehow makes me laugh. See, for me, it's funny because I'm like, oh my God, like, what is going on with this brain? And it makes me laugh and it just interrupts it. It brings like some clear seeing in. Now, that wouldn't be a good long-term strategy. I'm not going to walk around the world with every thought I have like, not an enemy, not an enemy, not a, that would get played really quick.
But it's a solid speed bump.
But it's like, it's a lovely, training tool as in integrating a new way of interacting with reality, as in it's benevolent and only deal with what's in front of you rather than projecting something from the past into the future. And then the other thing that I do that we've talked about before here is, let's say any of you listening say, oh, I'm hiding out in this way, or I have my own version of what we're talking about. And I know the moment, okay, I went up on stage, I split my pants, or, my parents yelled at me, or my grandparents, whatever the story is. If you have a moment that's really clear, you could do this if you don't have a moment that's clear, but it may be too hard to do unfacilitated. But if you have a moment that's clear, you can time travel to that moment, get into a beautiful meditative state, find your heart, find really the depths of your heart, And so that you're communicating from the level of your heart's deepest knowing, find that age and talk to that young one and share with them what they needed to hear whenever that thing happened, that happened. It's almost like if you imagine going back to the insertion point of that belief system. Sometimes we can't find it because it's intergenerational or because we can't remember never having it. That's fine too. But if it's not the insertion point, it may be a compounding point, like the point where that belief system just dug deep. And if you can find that and you can speak at the level of that young one, whether she's 4 and you speak like you're speaking to a 4-year-old, or if she's 15 or he's 20 and you speak at that level, if they get it, you introduce to them a new perspective. Like we were saying in the beginning, if you have a more true truth, you do oftentimes let go of the old belief if it registers. Like, this is so much clearer, makes so much more sense. So if you say it to that young one and they get it, since time is only a construct and not reality, it's like it updates throughout your timeline. And then something new can start to take place that can fuel then what you're saying, Brooke, because it has to inevitably end up with what you're saying, which is the courage and capacity to choose differently.
Yeah. Let's not be so fragile about this. Like, okay, everything you've just described, all that sturdiness, and then let's try it out. Like, let's see, let's reality test and really notice what happens now. What happens in the present moment when I reality test this and just like give it a whirl. Do that thing that I was hiding from.
Yes, I know. One thing that can be really helpful to remember as you're reality testing as such is, I think this is something Matt Kahn said, you're never that young, vulnerable one that this happened to in the same way. So whatever was the injury that makes you say, I cannot be seen, or the multiple injuries that say, I cannot be me, I cannot show people all that I am. Whatever that is, at the age that that happened, or in the many moments that that happened in your formative stage, you are now more wise than that, more mature than that, more seasoned than that. You have perspective you've never had. And hopefully, I hope, circumstances that are different than the ones that you were oftentimes kind of stuck with, so to speak. And so it's nice to remember, it's like this is where we can use some of our cognitive wisdom to support us in our journey. Because then when you go to take that step, if there's a part of you that's scared, you know, you could breathe, you can hold your heart, you can talk to the young one, but ultimately you get to say, like, it's never going to be what I was afraid it's going to be, because I'll never be that young, tender, and vulnerable as I was at whatever stage this happened. And these are just ways that almost like, do you ever notice people suck at giving themselves pep talks? Right? Yes. Like we've done that 30 Rock.
I'm thinking about our favorite 30 Rock scene. That's why I'm laughing. Yes. We'll put it in the show notes, folks, if you want to know exactly what we're giggling about.
You have to see this 30 Rock episode and delight with us, because it is perfection at how bad we are at pep talks for ourselves. And this is true for most empathic and spiritually sensitive people. Most of you just listening to the show, if you're listening to this show, this is probably true for you. And when you do client work, you get to be exposed to people's inner pep talks a lot, because you're like, well, what did you say to yourself? And so then someone articulates what was once only happening in the quiet of their mind. And when you hear it, you realize we are the worst. Oh my God. Like, we're scared to come out of hiding, and we're like, what's the matter with you, you stupid idiot?
I know,
figure it out. Why haven't you figured it out? And so here's the better pep talk. Better pep talk is, you've got this. It'll never be like it was before. It'll never be what you're afraid it is, because you've already survived that. And look how wise you are. And look how resilient you are. Look how sturdy you are. You've seen X, Y, and Z happen. So you've got this. Take a deep breath and you're going to be okay. Like, that's a solid, I'm still going to do this. I'm not going to let my fear co-opt me into always behaving in the same way kind of pep talk.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And just to add to that, how much more, I always love saying to myself and to my clients, how much more agency you have. Like if so much of this wounding happened when we were young, we didn't have agency. You know, if I'm 3 years old, I can't decide to move to a new apartment. It just is what it is. I'm stuck with whatever's happening in the household. So reminding ourselves of our adult agency and the environments that we have all this power to create, shift, change, just things like bank accounts and cars, you know, really makes a difference. If we want to make it really, really practical, that's very different than a child life. Thank you so much for being a part of our community and for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. That is also where you can subscribe to get our weekly digest of what we're up to and other resources that we're currently finding helpful. If you're wanting more support, blissandgrit.com also has more information on our private coaching practices. We're so grateful for the reviews you've written, for the membership support that so many of you have provided at Patreon, and for all the notes that you send. Thank you. We'll be back next week.